For decades, the world watched Tamar Braxton as the extra one, the emotional one, the sister who always seemed to explode at the wrong time. But what if those explosions weren't random at all? What if they were pressure fractures, the result of something that had been happening quietly, consistently, and painfully behind the scenes for years? According to what Tamar has now revealed, the real story doesn't start on reality TV. It starts in childhood. In rooms with no cameras. In moments where protection was expected, and allegedly replaced with control. When Tamar finally spoke about what Evelyn Braxton had been doing to her for decades, it didn't sound like drama. It sounded like survival. This wasn't a single argument. This wasn't tough love. This was a pattern. Tamar's words allegedly peeled back a family dynamic that fans had normalized for years. Constant criticism disguised as guidance, emotional pressure framed as discipline, and a system where Tamar was always the problem, no matter what she achieved, no matter how much she gave. And once she said it out loud, everything people thought they knew about the Braxton family suddenly felt incomplete. Viewers froze. Old clips took on new meaning. Tamar's breakdowns didn't look unstable anymore, they looked provoked. Her tears didn't look dramatic, they looked exhausted. And the most disturbing part. Tamar claims this didn't stop when she became an adult. Or a star. Or a mother. It followed her. What happens when the person who shaped you also wounds you, repeatedly, and the world keeps telling you to respect it? Because if Tamar is telling the truth, then this isn't just a family story. It's a decades-long emotional reckoning, and it's only just beginning. For Tamar Braxton, the story didn't begin with fame, cameras, or chart-topping records. According to what she has now revealed, it began much earlier, in a home where love was conditional, approval was unpredictable, and emotional survival required constant adaptation. What makes her account so unsettling isn't a single shocking incident. It's the longevity. The repetition. The way the behavior allegedly became normalized until Tamar herself was convinced the pain was just part of who she was supposed to be. Tamar has described a childhood where Evelyn Braxton's presence loomed large, not just as a mother, but as an authority that shaped how Tamar saw herself for decades. According to Tamar, the treatment wasn't always loud or obvious. It was subtle. Cutting remarks framed as help. Comparisons masked as motivation. Emotional withdrawal used as correction. Over time, Tamar claims, those patterns chipped away at her sense of safety and self-worth. Insiders and longtime viewers alike say this is where Tamar's public persona was born, not out of ego, but out of defense. When you're constantly criticized, you learn to be louder just to be heard. When you're dismissed, you over-explain. When affection feels conditional, you perform for it. Tamar has hinted that much of what the world labeled extra was actually armor. What's especially haunting about Tamar's account is her insistence that the behavior didn't stop when she grew up. According to her, success didn't soften Evelyn's approach, it intensified it. Achievements were minimized. Boundaries were challenged. Tamar claims that even as an adult, she was treated less like a daughter with autonomy and more like a role that needed managing. Fans revisiting old episodes now see moments differently. Scenes where Evelyn corrected Tamar harshly. Conversations where Tamar was spoken over. Instances where her feelings were dismissed as overreactions. At the time, it was framed as tough love. Now, Tamar's revelations suggest it may have been something more corrosive, a long-term erosion of emotional safety. According to Tamar, one of the most damaging aspects was how the family system reinforced this dynamic. When Evelyn criticized her, others stayed quiet. When Tamar reacted emotionally, she was labeled difficult. That imbalance, Tamar suggests, taught her a devastating lesson early on. Expressing pain would cost her credibility, while silence would cost her sanity. For decades, Tamar says, she tried every strategy to earn approval. Compliance, excellence, humor, even self-erasure. None of it worked consistently. And that inconsistency, she claims, was the point. When approval is unpredictable, you keep chasing it. You keep hoping the next version of yourself will finally be enough. What makes this revelation hit so hard is how closely it mirrors Tamar's public breakdowns. Her anxiety, her depression, her moments of emotional collapse. According to Tamar, those weren't isolated mental health struggles. They were the accumulated weight of years spent navigating a relationship where love felt transactional. She has described feeling like the family scapegoat, the one whose reactions distracted from the root cause. When conflict arose, Tamar's emotions became the focus instead of the behavior that provoked them. Over time, that dynamic taught everyone else that they didn't need to change. Tamar would absorb it. And she did. For decades. Tamar has also spoken about how this dynamic followed her into adulthood relationships. When you grow up having to prove your worth, you're more likely to tolerate disrespect. When emotional volatility is normalized, chaos feels familiar. Tamar suggests that her romantic struggles weren't random, they were patterned responses learned early. Perhaps the most painful part of Tamar's revelation is her acknowledgement that she didn't recognize the harm for a long time. Because when behavior is constant, it stops feeling abnormal. You stop asking whether it's okay. You start asking what's wrong with you for not handling it better. That's what makes her speaking now so significant. According to Tamar, it wasn't until years of therapy, distance, and near-breaking moments that she began to understand the difference between discipline and emotional control. Between accountability and criticism. Between love that guides and love that dominates. That realization, she says, was both freeing and devastating, because it meant confronting the truth about someone she was taught to revere. Importantly, Tamar hasn't framed her mother as a villain in a simplistic sense. She has acknowledged Evelyn's own trauma, sacrifices, and strength. But Tamar insists that understanding someone's wounds does not excuse the wounds they pass on. Impact matters more than intent. This first phase of Tamar's revelation isn't about blame. It's about naming a pattern that shaped her identity for decades. A pattern that taught her to doubt herself, overreact to be heard, and apologize for having needs. And once that pattern is named, it becomes impossible to keep pretending her pain came out of nowhere. As this chapter closes, one truth stands out above all else: Tamar didn't just survive the spotlight. According to her, she survived a lifetime of emotional pressure that no child, and no adult, should have to normalize. And if this is only the beginning of what she's willing to say, then the most uncomfortable part of this story isn't what Evelyn allegedly did, it's how long everyone accepted the fallout as just who Tamar is. Because once you realize behavior is a response, not a personality flaw, the entire narrative changes. And the next question becomes unavoidable: if Tamar has been carrying this for decades, how much of her pain has the world been mislabeling all along? As Tamar's revelations continued to surface, the second phase didn't feel louder, it felt heavier. This was the stage where people stopped reacting emotionally and started connecting dots. Because once Tamar named the pattern, everything that had once been dismissed as family tension began to look like something far more systematic and far more damaging. According to Tamar, the most painful part wasn't just what Evelyn Braxton allegedly did, it was how long it was allowed to continue without challenge. Tamar has suggested that for decades, her mother's behavior was protected by a mix of respect, fear, and tradition. Evelyn was the matriarch, the authority, the one whose word carried weight no one wanted to question. And in families like that, power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be unquestioned. Tamar has described how speaking up as a child was met not with understanding, but correction. Not curiosity, but control. According to her, emotions weren't explored, they were disciplined. And over time, that taught her that vulnerability was dangerous. If she cried, she was dramatic. If she protested, she was disrespectful. If she went quiet, she was ungrateful. There was no winning position. What deepened the damage, Tamar claims, was the inconsistency. Some days Evelyn was nurturing. Other days, distant. Praise came unpredictably. Affection could be withdrawn without explanation. Tamar has said that this emotional unpredictability kept her in a constant state of alertness, always scanning for cues, always adjusting herself to avoid disapproval. Psychologically, that kind of environment teaches a child to externalize their worth. According to Tamar, she grew up believing that if she could just be better, sing better, perform better, behave better, the criticism would stop. But it didn't. And that realization followed her into adulthood. No matter how successful she became, the goalpost moved. The approval never settled. Fans revisiting the show now point out how often Tamar sought validation in real time. How she reacted intensely to criticism. How she seemed desperate to be understood and quickly devastated when she wasn't. Through this new lens, those reactions don't look immature, they look conditioned. Tamar has also suggested that Evelyn's behavior shaped how the entire family related to conflict. Issues weren't resolved, they were absorbed. Harmony mattered more than honesty. And if someone disrupted that harmony, they became the problem. Tamar believes she filled that role early and never escaped it. According to her, once you're labeled the difficult one, everything you do is filtered through that assumption. Your reactions are scrutinized. Your intentions questioned. Your pain minimized. Tamar has said that she felt trapped in a cycle where she was constantly reacting to hurt, and then punished for reacting. That cycle, she claims, is what eventually broke her. This phase of her revelation is where mental health enters the conversation more clearly. Tamar has openly discussed her struggles with depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. According to her, those struggles didn't come from fame alone. They came from years of internalized messages telling her she was too much, too sensitive, too emotional, while never addressing what was being done to her. She has described moments where she questioned her own sanity. Where she wondered if she was imagining the harm. When the people around you normalize behavior, you start to doubt your instincts. Tamar has said that one of the hardest realizations in therapy was understanding that her reactions were proportionate, even if others refused to acknowledge the cause. What's especially devastating is Tamar's claim that even as an adult, she struggled to assert boundaries with her mother. Guilt, obligation, and fear kept pulling her back into the same dynamics. Saying no felt like betrayal. Distance felt like disrespect. And self-protection felt selfish. That internal conflict is visible in her past attempts to reconcile publicly. Fans remember the apologies. The tearful conversations. The promises to do better, often made by Tamar, not Evelyn. With hindsight, those moments look less like healing and more like survival. According to Tamar, it wasn't until she experienced motherhood herself that the dynamic became impossible to ignore. Loving her own child, she began questioning behaviors she once accepted as normal. She started asking whether emotional pressure builds character or erodes safety. And that question cracked something open she could no longer close. This phase of her revelation isn't about condemning Evelyn. Tamar has been careful to say that her mother is a product of her own trauma, her own survival, her own era. But Tamar is equally clear on this point. Understanding someone's pain does not mean sacrificing yourself to it. That distinction is what changed everything. Fans watching this unfold began to feel a different kind of discomfort, not shock, but recognition. Many saw reflections of their own family dynamics. Parents who criticized to prepare them. Caregivers who controlled in the name of love. Systems that demanded silence instead of healing. That resonance is why Tamar's words landed so deeply. She wasn't just telling her story. She was naming a dynamic many people never had language for. Emotional control masquerading as discipline. Love that required self-erasure. Authority that punished expression instead of guiding it. As this chapter closed, one truth became impossible to ignore. Tamar wasn't unstable. She was overstimulated by years of unresolved emotional harm. And once you understand that, it becomes clear how dangerous it is to reduce complex pain to personality flaws. This wasn't a story about a difficult daughter. It was a story about a child who learned too early that love had conditions, and spent decades trying to meet them. And with that realization, the narrative around Tamar Braxton didn't just shift. It broke open. By the time Tamar reached the third phase of her truth-telling, something fundamental had changed, not just in how the public viewed Evelyn Braxton, but in how Tamar viewed herself. This stage wasn't about recounting pain anymore. It was about unlearning permission. The permission she had been conditioned to seek her entire life. The permission to speak. To disagree. To protect herself. To exist without explanation. According to Tamar, this was the hardest part of the journey, because it required letting go of the version of family she had spent decades trying to preserve. Not the people themselves, but the fantasy that if she just endured a little longer, loved a little harder, or performed a little better, the dynamic would finally shift. It didn't. Tamar has said that what finally broke the cycle wasn't one argument, or one revelation, it was exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your body when you realize the relationship is costing you more than it's giving, and that no amount of understanding will make someone treat you differently if the system benefits from you staying small. In this phase, Tamar stopped trying to be the good daughter. That role had demanded silence when she was hurt. Gratitude when she was diminished. Forgiveness without repair. And most dangerously, it had required her to doubt her own reality whenever it conflicted with the family narrative. Walking away from that role, Tamar says, felt like betrayal at first, but staying in it had nearly destroyed her. According to Tamar, the biggest lie she had to dismantle was the idea that boundaries are disrespectful. For years, she believed that pushing back meant being ungrateful, that distance meant abandonment, and that self-protection meant selfishness. Those beliefs weren't innate, they were learned. And once she recognized that, she began questioning everything she'd been taught about love and loyalty. This phase also brought clarity about why reconciliation attempts had failed in the past. Tamar has explained that apologies without change only reset the cycle. Emotional conversations without accountability only delayed the next rupture. And public displays of unity often masked private discomfort that never actually got resolved. She wasn't healing, she was postponing. Fans noticed the shift immediately. Tamar's energy changed. Less reactive. Less frantic. Less desperate to be understood. That wasn't because the pain disappeared, it was because she stopped arguing with it. She stopped trying to convince people who benefited from misunderstanding her. And that, according to Tamar, was the most radical act of self-respect she had ever taken. She has also spoken about grief in this phase, not just grief for what happened, but grief for what never would. The mother-daughter relationship she hoped for. The unconditional emotional safety she never received. The version of herself she might have been if she hadn't spent decades proving her worth. That grief, she says, was necessary. Because you can't heal what you're still hoping will change. Tamar has been careful to clarify that this stage is not about cutting people off in anger. It's about choosing proximity with intention. About recognizing that access to you is not a right, it's earned through consistency, respect, and care. And if those things are missing, love alone is not enough to justify the damage. This is where the conversation became deeply uncomfortable for many viewers. Because Tamar's story challenges a sacred cultural narrative, that parents are always owed forgiveness, access, and silence, no matter the cost. Tamar doesn't deny Evelyn's sacrifices or struggles. But she insists that sacrifice does not cancel harm, and struggle does not excuse control. Impact still matters. According to Tamar, once she stopped internalizing blame, she also stopped reenacting the dynamic elsewhere. She began recognizing how often she had accepted relationships that mirrored her upbringing, emotionally unpredictable, validation-based, and power imbalance. And she began choosing differently. That choice wasn't easy. She has admitted that distance came with guilt, with backlash, with accusations of ingratitude and disloyalty. But she also says it came with peace, something she had never consistently known before. Peace that didn't require performance. Peace that didn't disappear the moment she asserted herself. This phase also reframed her public image permanently. The difficult label lost its power once people understood its origin. Tamar wasn't difficult, she was responding to pressure. She wasn't dramatic, she was unheard. She wasn't unstable, she was emotionally overextended for decades in a system that rewarded her silence and punished her expression. And once that realization set in, the story stopped being about Evelyn alone. It became about how often families, especially public ones, demand that the most emotionally expressive person absorb all the dysfunction, so everyone else can appear functional. How often the truth teller becomes the scapegoat. How often pain is mislabeled as personality. Tamar's final message in this phase is not accusatory, it's instructive. She isn't asking people to villainize her mother. She's asking them to believe children when they say something hurts, even when the person hurting them is doing their best. She's asking people to stop confusing endurance with strength and silence with love. Most importantly, she's asking people to reconsider who gets labeled too much and why. Because when you strip away decades of misinterpretation, one truth remains: Tamar Braxton didn't survive in spite of her sensitivity. She survived because of it. And the most powerful part of her story isn't what Evelyn allegedly did, it's what Tamar finally stopped accepting. That isn't exposure. It's emancipation. If you stayed through this entire story, it's because something in it felt familiar, not celebrity drama, but a truth people rarely say out loud. This wasn't about tearing down a mother or rewriting family history. It was about naming what happens when love comes with conditions, when silence is mistaken for respect, and when the most expressive person is blamed for the harm they're reacting to. This conversation doesn't end when the video does. It follows you into how you look at families, authority, loyalty, and the way pain gets mislabeled as personality. Once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it, and that's why this matters. So don't let it disappear. Like this video, so it doesn't get buried under surface level takes. Subscribe so you'll hear when these conversations continue, because they won't always come wrapped in headlines, they'll come in moments of recognition. And comment, because stories like this are shaped by people who are willing to say, that wasn't okay, even when it's uncomfortable. This wasn't about blame. It was about truth, boundaries, and healing that doesn't require permission. And if Tamar's story resonated with you, you're not alone. You're just finally hearing something that was never meant to stay quiet.